Continuing to read from Lama Yeshe Losal Rinpoche's From a Mountain in Tibet, from page 151. I hadn't seen that much of Trungpa while I'd been busy with the job of setting up the centers. He was based in Boulder, Colorado, and though he came regularly to New York to lead courses, when he was in town he was even busier than me. He always made time for us to get together, though, and I found him as kind, warm, and inspiring as ever. He was so generous with me. He knew I loved fancy clothes, and would take me shopping to boutiques, where I picked up the latest fashions. Now that I had a lot more free time, I wanted to spend it with him. I would go to Boulder for weeks on end and hang out with Trungpa and his students at the center. By 1977, he had established centers all over the States, and once a year all his students gathered in Boulder. I attended that gathering in 1978 and saw how he was able to communicate with American people and how they responded to him. He was determined to transform the hierarchy between guru and pupil and to shed the formality of Tibetan teachers. There was always a lot of drinking, drug-taking, smoking, and partying mixed in with the teachings. He slept with his students' wives and encouraged Diana to sleep with the students. It was free love in action. Trungpa wanted to immerse himself in the prevailing culture of the time and absorb its confusion and chaos so that he could help others to purify it within themselves. His approach was to allow everybody to indulge themselves. Then, once they had drunk fully from the cup of desire and seen that it contained no lasting fulfillment, he would shift his focus and insist that they begin to introduce more discipline to their practice. He asked them to do a lot of shine, calm abiding meditation, to settle their minds. Then, when their minds were stable, he would insist on more and more rigor and discipline. Trungpa always reminded people that it was not acceptable to walk the Dharma path in a mindless, ego-driven way. If we became proud of our spiritual discipline, our virtuousness, or our accomplishments in meditation, then we are falling into a trap of spiritual materialism, which is just as destructive as any other kind. Trungpa could not tolerate any spiritual pretentiousness at all. I was fascinated by all this, though in hindsight, and especially now that we live in very different times, I can see how some of it was open to misunderstanding. There's no doubt that Trungpa was a paradox. How was it possible for someone who did not observe the precept of refraining from intoxication, and someone whose sexual behavior might look questionable, also be an exceptionally gifted teacher? At the time, I definitely believed that Trungpa's so-called crazy wisdom was a valid way to connect people in the United States, which was being transformed by the counterculture movements of the 60s and 70s. Crazy wisdom is a complex idea that has its roots in early Buddhist texts and could be described as a state of innocent awareness that rejects social conventions. Some highly realized masters who have attained crazy wisdom can make use of behaviors that might appear wrong in order to open people's eyes to their own behavior. Many of his followers have said that Trungpa embodied this notion of crazy wisdom, though it's not a term I use about him, as I recognize that it might, in other circumstances, be used as an excuse for bad behavior. I maintain that Trungpa's legacy of making the Dharma accessible throughout the West speaks for itself. The traditional Tibetan approach would not have worked in the United States at that time. It's also vital to say that I do not believe that Trungpa ever behaved in a way that broke the Buddhist precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Yes, he had many partners, but that was in keeping with the promiscuity of the times. Diana was, of course, at liberty to do the same. Coercive sex is, of course, always a different matter, but there was never any suggestion that any coercion was involved. Trungpa lived his life from a position of wanting to help people. He was a sincere person, but he could certainly be confusing. At the time, I was just happy to fall in with his approach of indulging desires, though I was still too immature in any thinking to grasp that it was a step on the way to their purification. When I wasn't partying with him, there wasn't any thought of anything else in my mind. On one occasion, Tenzin and I visited him at his center in Vermont. By this time, Tenzin was no longer a monk, and he and I were both delighted to find that Trungpa had a cellar full of sake, Japanese rice wine. He asked Tenzin and me to make momo, steamed dumplings, which are a Tibetan delicacy. I'd learned a few skills from our cook by then, so I tried to oblige. But I drank so much sake that I dropped and broke one of his very expensive sets of porcelain plates. He just said, "Don't worry. Let's have another glass." He was such a complex man, but I still believe that he was one of the most highly realized people I've ever met. Despite all his crazy behavior, he was able to communicate the essence of the Dharma in a way that people could really understand, and his books, such as Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, were unique and powerful contributions to the spread of the Dharma in the West. Trungpa managed to find a way of teaching that directly related to people's minds and life situations, and so he became very popular. Not everyone was convinced, of course. I remember one occasion in Boulder when Trungpa and I had been drinking for hours, even though he was supposed to be giving a talk. Eventually, 4 hours after the scheduled start time, he decided to head off, by which point he was not only late but very drunk. An angry American student confronted him, saying, "Mr. Trungpa, it seems to me that you are full of shit." To which Trungpa replied, "Yes, that is true. But most of the shit is yours." One day he came to speak in New York. The room was full to overflowing, and as usual he was drunk and arrived very late. I was sitting next to him on the podium. When his talk was finished, we walked outside, and someone ran up to him in the street and said, "I went to see Dudjom Rinpoche, and he needed gold. So I offered him gold. What do you want, Rinpoche?" Trungpa turned to him and said, "Oh, really? Is that true?" Then he took out his penis and peed on this man's shoes. Trungpa was crazy, completely unpredictable and outrageous. But he was also brilliant, kind, and a great teacher. I spent 2.5 years after KTD was founded, indulging in almost all the pleasures and vices New York could offer a young man in the 70s. I still didn't touch drugs. I'd been put off by seeing how people abused them at Samiling. But I went to nightclubs in Manhattan, slept with and discarded women with no thought for their feelings, drank whiskey until I passed out. I was the driver for visiting Lamas and would tear around in the official car, a red Cadillac, not caring if I got into road battles or bumped other vehicles. I became very nasty on the road. I had 2 big fat Lamas sitting next to me when I drove to collect teachers and Tibetan dignitaries. If I'd bumped into someone else's car, then I would say to the driver that my 2 companions were kung fu experts, so they'd better watch out. I had slipped back into total wildness and closed my heart to the great masters around me, who were suggesting I was on the wrong path and urgently needed to tame my mind. Was I happy? No. Sometimes I was having fun, but I was increasingly tormented by my memories, my resentment, and anger. I'd been having nightmares for years, and they got worse and worse. They were always about crossing the Brahmaputra River. In the dream, I was swimming to escape the bullets as they rained into the water around me, which was full of bodies. I would awake with my heart pounding, in a state of panic. I was increasingly out of control. Most mornings I would wake up feeling deeply ashamed of myself. I'd open my eyes and try to work out what had happened the night before. Was I alone? Or was there a woman with me? If so, who was she? Had I fought with anyone last night? Who had I upset? By this point, I was ruining my reputation among the Tibetan community. Tibetans are very conservative and ethical in how they go about their lives because of their belief in karma. People would say, "Whatever you do, do not end up like Jamdrak." I knew that Akon would have been kept informed of all my misdemeanors, and this only increased my fury and shame. It meant everything to me that His Holiness the Karmapa never wavered in his support. I felt he saw me not just as a scoundrel, but as someone with deep potential, albeit deeply buried. Long ago he had recognized something in me, some kernel of goodness that I could not see. And because he kept faith with that part of me, eventually I was able to find it for myself. One night I was so drunk that I was sick all over myself and had to be cared for by Trungpa's students. I woke up in my room in Trungpa's center in Boulder with a terrible hangover. The place was littered with empty wine and beer bottles and my discarded clothes. My head was pounding. I felt totally empty. Deep down in my heart, I felt that something big was missing, and as a consequence, my life was going nowhere. This was the moment I realized that I had to change. I have talked to so many people about their rock-bottom moments, and every single one is different. Some of them are very dramatic. Some of them are more like a series of gradual realizations. Some people come to me feeling powerless and without any direction. Others need little more than a nudge of encouragement. Whoever they are, whatever they have done or not done, I tell everyone the same thing. All change begins with the resolve to turn away from negative thoughts and actions, and towards the positive. It begins with the commitment to sit in stillness and face ourselves. To face the negative habits we have become enslaved to, and feel remorse for the suffering this has caused, both to ourselves and to others. If we keep looking, the deep wellspring of positive potential that each of us has in abundance gradually begins to surface. We may have to repeat this process over and over again. In fact, we certainly will have to do it many times. But we can do it. You can do it. On that morning in Colorado, I was ready. It was a crucial moment in a long series of many such moments. Seeds that had been planted in Rumtek, in Scotland, and in the States were finally bursting into life. Nurtured by the mud that clogged my mind. My anger, fear, shame, and self-disgust were the material from which the seeds of Dharma were about to burst forth. I just had to find the humility to do nothing except allow the process to run its course without fighting it or running away. My pride had always prevented me in the past. I had spent years dancing in its grip. I thought I had proved myself invaluable to His Holiness the Karmapa, when in fact he had been invaluable to me. It was only when I drained the cup of materialism and self-obsession to the dregs that I could see clearly what remained for me. My pride finally quietened down enough to make way for the grace within me to flower. Continuing with Lama Yeshe Losal Rinpoche's From a Mountain in Tibet, from page 151.
I knew right away when Lama Yeshe met up with Trungpa, all the fun of the fair and the boozy binges we started all over again.
Yes.
So I know where Lama Yeshe's coming because I experienced it myself.
Yes.
Been drinking and getting sick and things like that. I don't know if the same things that Lama Yeshe's done. So I know where he's coming from.
Yes.
But it takes a while to realise your negative side, you know.
Yes.
So you can get carried away when you mix with the people who indulge in these things. And actually, really part of the secret is really to try and get away from people who indulge in these things, you know.
Yes, doesn't Lama Yeshe Rinpoche always say that? A person needs to leave the environment in which the things were not positive.
That's right, yeah.
And that's true for all of us. We sometimes have to leave the town or the country or the family or the relationship or the whatever the situation is to get free of it.
But it shows that at that time people have a strong connection, you know, and it's very difficult to pull away once you're in the grip of it, you know.
That's right.
So it's tearing away. It wasn't very easy to do.
Yes.
You know, it's very difficult, and a lot of people never ever broke away from it. Just a few people, I would say, broke away from that.
It's the most difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
Because we get associated. We think that we are that person in that pattern.
Yeah.
And we can't imagine living without those things that are not good for us.
Yeah, when you get involved, you become a different person, you know.
Yes.
Yes, the personality changes with all that alcohol and drink. Your personality changes.
Yes.
Yeah, and you become somebody that's not really you know.
Yes. And then that's who people think you are.
Yeah.
And they relate to you as if that's who you are.
Yeah.
It all sends a vicious cycle, isn't it? It reinforces itself.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And it seems that everyone on the spiritual path has some sort of a crisis of this sort. It may not always be with one particular addiction, but it may always be something that takes us to, as you said, our rock bottoms.
Yeah.
And I mean, even someone like Milarepa, he also experienced it, didn't he? Before he could have his breakthrough, he had to go through get to the lowest place he could possibly be.
Yeah, I usually find that with most cases, you hit that rock bottom.
Yes.
Then once you hit that rock bottom, you can't go any further. You can you come back up again.
Yes.
Know? Yes.
But a lot of people, as you say, they don't pull it off.
No. And instead they're stuck in the mud.
That's
They
right.
can't get away.
And sometimes go deeper.
Aye.
It gets worse.
Yeah.
So it's really a presence of a support, isn't it, that enables us to change.
See, a lot of people become alcoholics and end up they can't do without it. They're stuck.
Yes.
It's like an illness, a disease, you know.
Yes.
But some people can take it and it's still break, and it doesn't have a strong grip on them, you know.
Yes.
They're the ones that can come out of it, you know.
Yeah. Well, especially if the addictions that we have are not going to interfere with our mental capacities.
That's right. Yeah.
So there is a distinction that Lama Yeshe keeps bringing up about how he didn't get involved with drugs, and that would have made a huge difference, because if he had gone on that path, then his mental processes and his thought processes would have changed, even on a deeper level.
Yeah, yeah.
So he was very lucky. He was very, very lucky. And also, he was able to see it in environments that he'd been, that the consequence of that going on that path before he took that route himself. So there certainly are different addictions, aren't there? And there are different poisons that hold us.
It affects people different, you know.
Yes.
It affects a bit different.
Yes.
It affects me more deeper level than others, you know.
Yes.
So.
It's very unfortunate that it happens, and we're very lucky if there's somebody who can help us get out of those situations.
Yes.
And then, as he said, it was Karmapa who held him together and never lost confidence in him, that ended up being the force that made it possible for him to realize that he could do it.
Yeah, and him having that great faith in the Karmapa also was a good help.
That was the main thing.
Yes.
Because in those rock bottom places, we don't believe in ourselves, do we? And we're very much weakened and very confused.
Yes.
And we really struggle. And sometimes it doesn't feel like we could get out, no matter what way we go. We just can't get out. So this is when we are blessed to have someone who can be the bridge to another way of living.
Yeah. So it takes a few trials and error before you can escape from it, you know.
Well, don't you think that's part of the Maras too?
Yeah. Well,
because as soon as we start moving in any positive direction, we become sort of a target for these other things to pull us away from where we're trying to go.
That's right.
So it's very unfortunate, and we're often caught by surprise because we think, oh, we've just made this big change and now it's all going to be very positive. Yeah. And then we get a real shock when what we thought we've left behind and abandoned is returning.
And you slip back into it again.
That's right.
Once you meet the various friends who indulge in it and you get mixed with them, then, well...
Back again. Yes. Or the relationships that aren't any good, and then the new people you meet re-trigger the same patterns, and you find yourself back in the same situation.
Yeah.
So this is a cycle that is very personal. Like Lama Yeshe Rinpoche said, everyone's rock bottom is different from everyone else's.
Yeah.
But these patterns are very much something that we all go through on the spiritual path, don't you think?
Yes, aye. Yeah.
That's our testing ground.
You have your ups and downs, you know.
Yeah.
Ups and downs.
There is this thing about when we think we have finally escaped or gotten away from something that we're running from or we want to change, that then it comes back. And we have to keep repeatedly, over and over again.
Trial and error.
Yes.
Trial and error. Yes.
Recommitting ourselves to the positive, even though the easiest thing to do would be to just slip back into the old familiar patterns that weren't very good.
Yeah.
It's a tall order to change from the negative to the positive. It's a
That's right.
momentous task, and it takes time, as he said.
Yes.
We have to be willing to not do anything and allow what needs to come to the surface to arise.
Yes.
So this is his turning point again. Another turning point, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So we're quite happy with this.
We're quite happy when we can see that we're not alone in having gone through these difficult times.
Yes.
And we're very happy when we realize that there can be light at the end of the tunnel. And we're very happy when we were able to change our environments so that we're not being stimulated and triggered over and over again by things that were destructive.
Yes.
This is what brings a different level of joy. It's not necessarily we're walking around always finding it's easy or simple or straightforward, but we are very happy to have stepped back and seen ourselves in a more honest light and have decided that, as he said, we can do it. We can turn to the positive, and we can become the person who's no longer bound by these addictions, these habits, these patterns. It's a very powerful moment, isn't it?
Yes.
And very beautiful when we can move in a new direction.
Yes, there's very few people would get that deep hole can escape.
It's very, very rare.
Yes. But,
even the teachings talk about it, don't they? They say to find those that are truly on the spiritual path as rare as seeing a star in the daytime.
Yes.
Very, very rare to have conducive conditions and to be able to believe that we can do it and to have the teaching and guidance we need to pull it off.
The energy went into that. It was turned the other way, like a U-turn. Like a U-turn, things can go quite well for you.
It's the example he's giving, isn't he? He says the mud, like the muck.
That's right, yeah.
The muck, the most difficult times that we have, become the fertile ground in which our lotuses will open.
Yeah.
And we will actually step into the place where our potential becomes activated and we can be more positive.
Yeah.
So this being the end of a chapter, we can ring the singing bowl for this moment of hope and this moment of potential and positivity. Yes. Are you happy?
Yes.